Hi, folks. Welcome to Sunday's edition of the I Write Radio podcast. No Jimmy today. He's out flogging his hackney carriage, trying to earn a crust. Just Stuart Lockhead.
Oh, yeah.
And myself, Norrie Stewart. We're going to cover the TV politics programs today, Marr and Brewer, although I don't think we'll be spending that much time on them. But there's three different styles of articles that we want to look at. One from Peter A. Bell's blog, one from the National, Gerry Hassan, and Alex Massie in, I think it was the Times, was it?
Yeah, the Times.
Very different in style, but interesting reads, all three of them, for different reasons. Today's political programming, let's kick off with Marr. Stuart, what did you think?
I'll just turn my sound down on the phone. We got caught out the other day, didn't I? Marr, right. Well, to start with, at 8:30, I watched Sophie Ridge because she comes on half an hour earlier. And to be honest, a lot of the time they get the same guests. They just rotate them. You know, they've obviously, the government in particular, decided to put up who they're going to put up, and the official spokespeople will appear on both Sophie Ridge and Marr. Yes, what did I think of it? I thought that given what we have been through this week and the outstanding news about how this government is prepared to break international treaties, I'm surprised how little that really featured. What we got was, certainly on Marr, what we got was reading out of the Telegraph in particular by their, I forget his name, he's one of their podcasters, works with Herr Kuenberg.
Klunsberg. Yeah.
And he was coming up with just the story that number 10, as they call it, want you to hear. Although I would say the story that they want you to hear is like, we really want this and we're going to blame the EU, but when we climb down a bit, you'll accept half the deal that we'll settle for.
I just found it, I mean, it was, what is he? He's the minister responsible for justice that Marr had on.
Buckland,
a wee Welsh guy. He basically said that if he didn't think whatever the law was to his liking, in his opinion, a good law, I suppose, he would freely break it. Now, I don't think the law governing who decides Scotland's future is a good law. So is it okay if I break it? Or is it only government ministers and the elite who get to break the law, and us wee people have to obey the laws that they make?
You've got to remember that ultimate sovereignty in England, not in Scotland, we don't believe in this, the ultimate sovereignty lies with Parliament. Ever since 1688, ever since they invited King Billy from William of Orange to come in and take over the throne, so it's always been about the sovereignty of Parliament. We don't have a written constitution.
But that's not really the point here, Stuart. I mean, international law is international law. Sovereignty of Parliament, when they agree a treaty, that sovereignty, surely its job is to maintain the treaty, not to decide that it can break it whenever it wants. It can withdraw from a treaty, but it can't pick and choose which bits of a treaty it adheres to and doesn't adhere to. Can you imagine the howls of outrage if the EU had decided that some treaty that had been agreed could be broken at a whim? I mean, it's absolutely beggars belief, and is part of an ongoing package. You know, I mean, I'm going to drive to Barnard Castle because the rules don't apply to me. It's the same nonsense. So at what point, I mean, for instance, the Chinese overriding the agreement about Hong Kong, Can Britain actually stand up and criticise them for doing it now? No, they can't.
Well, they will, but they've got egg on their face, but they can't see it. They can't see the mote in their own eye, can they?
Well, I just find the whole thing beggars belief. And the way it's being treated by the media, there should be howls of outrage about this.
Well, that's what I said at the start there. I was really disappointed by both Ridge and Marr not focusing on this key issue, that we have a government that's prepared to break the law. Do you know what Maggie Thatcher would have said about it? Goodness knows. We will probably come to that further down the line today.
I think she would have been better at the politics. I'm not entirely in agreement with what's been written today about her view of breaking the law. I'm pretty sure Maggie Thatcher would have broken the law if she considered it in the interests of her Great Britain. But she would have done it in a much more politically sound way.
If you think back to the horror show of the Iraq War, where Blair and Brown and co illegally went to war with the Americans in Iraq. Just before that happened, before that Labour government came into power, it wasn't necessary for the British government to go to Parliament and get approval to go to war.
Yeah,
Blair brought it in and then regretted it, obviously.
Well, I'll bet you money if we need a war in order for the Tories to win the next election, they'll find a way around getting Parliament's permission for it.
Well, you could say they've got an 80-seat majority. They've got still 4.5 years to go. They've got 42% in the polls, up against Labour at 38%, even after all this time of this calamity Prime Minister. They're laughing.
Well, I don't think they are. I think the chickens have yet to come home to roost.
Don't mention chickens.
which brings us neatly onto Brewer's interview with, what was his name?
Steven Barclay.
Arch Brexiteer.
Yes, he's a very smooth operator, is Steven Barclay.
He's learnt that methodology of blah 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 blah.
Yes, he's an accomplished blocker.
Yes, take up as much time with your answer as you possibly can, while avoiding answering, so that the interviewer can't get another question in. Yeah,
I've also got
ran rings round Brewer.
Yes, I've got this. Oh, ran rings round him. I got a clear impression that Brewer was not prepped at all, and because it was like he was throwing down. He was asking trivial questions that really nobody was interested in. I counted. He mentioned chlorinated chicken at least 30 times.
I don't want to talk about chlorinated chicken. However, does this mean that chlorinated chicken will come into Scotland with your trade deal?
I was howling at the TV at that point. I was screaming at the TV, if you don't want chlorinated chicken, don't fucking buy it.
Well, here you go. There's the next problem. If they don't mark imported American chicken with the stars and stripes, how do you know where it comes from?
Well, yes.
Well, if you read the outline for the trade deal that the Americans produced, they do not want country of origin marked on the food.
Well, you're just falling into Brewer's trap. I mean, this is an old story. It's a minor part of a much bigger story. Where the same law that would allow American chlorinated chicken on our shelves in the UK would allow Americans to buy up the NHS.
Yes. But the chlorinated chicken illustrates it easily.
Well, the chlorinated chicken neither here nor there. It's the NHS that matters.
Yeah, but it illustrates the problem. It's a much more complicated problem about the NHS.
Yeah, but did Brewer mention it? No, I suspect he was on the bevy last night, and when he came into the studio, they said, "This is what you're going to talk about, and just keep mentioning chlorinated chicken. It's your dead cat today."
It was appalling. Appalling. Although I have to say his opponent in the interview played it classically. Brewer just doesn't have the bottle to go, shut up.
No, he doesn't. And Steven Barclay, let's be honest, he's been nominated to deal with Scotland. He's actually been up here a couple of times in recent months when they needed somebody a minister from London to appear in Scotland. I don't think he's got any Scottish roots, but he's very good at blocking.
Well, what he did do was continually talk about Scottish business. And effectively, the Tory gambit appears to be totally sideline the Scottish government, simply talk about Scottish business. We're Tories, Scottish business, Scottish government, Scottish business. That will be the button they press all the time.
And the big issue could have been, because they did talk about trade, and Steven Barclay did say that the claims, I'm not agreeing with it, that 60% of Scotland's exports goes to England. And that's why they need this new law, this internal market. Now, wait a minute. Scotland's trade and business goes to England just now quite happily, and what do we need more laws for?
Well, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that this will go through.
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing we can do about it.
And when it goes through, the Tories will again box clever. They'll do what they do at the moment. We are in talks with the Scottish government, but the Scottish government won't do what we say, so we're not having any more talks with them. That is effectively how they've run it. Oh yeah, we're quite happy to meet you, talk to you on the phone. This is what we want you to do. Oh, you're not going to do that. Well, we won't bother meeting you again. So that's what's going to happen. The interesting thing I think for me is, and it popped into it, Brewer said, oh, this of course won't affect Barnett consequentials. But I can quite easily see this affecting Barnett consequentials. The British government will come up with, I don't know, a 17-lane superhighway between Oban and Edinburgh, and Barnett consequentials will be lost as part of the cost of that. So there are going to be things happen in Scotland that the Tory government wants to use as a headline.
Well, think about it, Norrie. Right. So you're running a business in Scotland, largely Scottish-based and mostly Scottish customers, and the British government offers you £1 million, very cheap loan, as long as you do X, Y, and Z. Are they going to turn it down? Of course not.
No, and if that in effect interferes with a longer term strategy of the Scottish government, hell mend you. So it actually sets the Scottish government up to fail. If their Green Deal, for instance, involves building no more roads, but putting up electric pumps for electric cars to travel,
all right,
and the British government decides to stick another lane on the Glasgow to Edinburgh motorway, dual carriageway, the Scottish government is stymied in what it's trying to do. And that's the problem. They can interfere with Scotland's long-term policy, Scottish government long-term policy. And it'll look like the Scottish government are moaning because they're refusing a bigger road.
Look, my point with with Brewer was he wasn't discussing the big issues that we were discussing in Scotland. He wasn't discussing the virus and how it's accelerating. He wasn't discussing how the BBC have banned live broadcasts of the First Minister with vital information in the middle of this pandemic, and he wasn't discussing the danger to devolution in Scotland. These are the three big issues that have been discussed all week in Scotland.
Exactly. He's totally ignored the issues that affect Scotland. The other point, now I don't know if it's true, but something popped up on my Twitter feed saying that the BBC have requested an outline of the First Minister's daily broadcast. Okay, so effectively what they're asking for is
censorship.
No, what they're asking for is a preview of what she's going to say. Now, how does she know what she's going to say when she's facing a barrage of hyena press questions?
Very good point, Murray.
She doesn't know what she's going to be asked.
That's right.
But what it does is underline a point that I think I made on Friday, which is the BBC will broadcast the question the BBC ask her. That's what they'll broadcast. That's all they ever broadcast.
That's all they ever broadcast. But mind you, STVs are the same.
Well, the point I'm making here is, therefore, the BBC will dictate what the First Minister gets to tell the public. The BBC are not an elected body, and they have no right of censorship over the First Minister.
People think we're conspiracy theorists when we talk about the BBC just being the mouthpiece of the government. I'm sorry, that's what they are now. I mean, anyone who doesn't think that's true. Look, yes, the BBC produced some wonderful non-fact television, some of the best in the world probably. But when it comes to news and the information that they provide to the people of this country, they are guilty of simply being the propaganda arm of the government.
Well, even if you don't believe that, how can you possibly accept that the BBC should be the arbitrators of what information gets to the public? Now, this isn't a case of having to go and search out information. They've got the First Minister standing at a podium being quizzed on a daily basis by journalists. Not by anybody with anything but an anti-government agenda. So how could it be better than this? Oh, I know. What we'll do is we'll get her to do it in Parliament, where every question that she has to answer has a political slant. Not an informative slant, a political slant. So the BBC's argument is this health pandemic would be helped by partisan political questioning rather than our wonderful free press getting the opportunity to question on behalf of the people.
No, you're making a very good point. And I think I'd forgotten about that because it is a key issue that most of the time of that, most of the time of that slot, let's say it's an hour, typically sometimes it's an hour and a quarter, the briefing. But an hour of that is normally hostile journalists asking very difficult questions. So what kind of a party political broadcast on behalf of the SNP is that?
Well, they're not arguing that. They're being quite clever about this. They're denying there's any political element to this. What they're actually claiming is that their ability to editorialize it is a benefit.
Have you got that clip of Ian Small speaking for the...
I have somewhere, yes, if you give me just a second.
Yes, I'm quite happy to.
This is Ian Small being
devious,
questioned by none other than the BBC.
John Beattie.
Yeah.
On the 9, presumably. Because that's
was it on the 9? Yes, I think it was.
I think it was.
Here you go.
And why is the BBC doing this?
I think, John, we're looking at the way the situation is evolving, and we've been looking at that clearly over the last few weeks, and we've seen that the last 2 weeks aside, I would say that things were slowly getting back to normal. People were going back to work, services were going back online, schools were going back, and the Parliament clearly was back in business as well. But we felt in those circumstances that perhaps we should properly review how best to make sure that we're getting the information that comes from these briefings across to audiences. Now, we clearly can do that through a number of means. There's been a bit of misreporting, I think, around some of this, suggesting that we are moving away or that we are abandoning the briefings. That is simply not the case. We will continue to cover off the briefing when there is evidence of clear messaging that requires to be given across. But I would emphasise that we are not stopping doing briefings. To suggest that is simply untrue.
Liar!
300,000 viewers tune in for the First Minister's daily coronavirus briefing.
We're simply finding ways that better can impart that information.
More than 300,000 viewers tune in for the First Minister's daily coronavirus briefing.
But you are going to cut back, and I have to ask you straight up, have you come under political pressure to do this?
What I would say is that there have been entreaties made to us by political parties. That's not unusual. That's an everyday event with the BBC. But what I can clearly say is that all of the decisions around this have been made by our editorial teams, by our news teams, by our editorial standards teams. Basically, we have determined that the best way forward would be not necessarily to be there every single day, but to be there when important messages are being imparted, as I say.
I mean, I was shouting at the telly when that came on. I was shouting now. It's absolutely so obvious.
I don't disagree with you. I mean, I just find it, why the BBC, I mean, they're going to be there. They're going to film this because they've said it's going online. Okay? Mm-hmm. So they're going to be there. Meanwhile, on BBC Scotland, they're doing reruns of Antiques Roadshow.
Fine, they're starting off with a red, white and blue jingoistic, something to do with celebrating Battle of Britain?
I've no idea. But, you know, they've got a channel there on which they're running reruns of the Antiques Swear Word Roadshow.
And what we really need, especially for the elderly who are most at risk in this virus, in this pandemic, is direct connection between the First Minister who makes the decisions and her team, who are very clear about their messaging, direct to the people. I mean, people will die because of this decision by the BBC. I'm standing on that.
You know, the BBC, who use the same arguments that have been used about the elderly when they were arguing about not taking responsibility for the free TV licenses, are now doing exactly the harm that they claimed they were trying to stop happening by leaving the payment for the license in the government's hands. It's so hypocritical, and it's so obviously political. I mean, there's how anybody could doubt it is beyond me. Anyway, rant over.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Peter Bell's blog piece.
Yes, it's a long piece. He's very good at writing every day, and then of course, because he writes every day, the quality can vary. Sometimes it's very passionate. Today is less passionate, and it's a long piece. I would actually refer our listeners and viewers.
I'll put up links to the pieces we're talking about.
What can we learn from Boris Johnson? And it's actually quite depressing, because what he's kind of, I'll sum it up this way. What he's saying is, look, don't look at the clown, Boris Johnson. Right now, they're winning everything by lying and cheating. What do you expect them to do in the case of a bid for Scottish independence? And surely, our government, led by Nicola Sturgeon, should be learning something from that.
I think I distilled it down to, don't look at who's playing, look at the winners and how they won. So effectively, what the message he's trying to get out is, look at how No won in the independence referendum in 2014. Doesn't matter who's on their side. What matters is the methodology they used to get more votes. And he's really saying we've never done an in-depth study of how they won.
Where's the analysis to go
as a
forward?
yes movement?
Yeah.
I don't think you need an in-depth study, to be honest.
You can see how they're behaving now, and they're using the same methods now as they did back then for our referendum. He
disses some of the reasons given, but there's no doubt that having the press in your pocket is an advantage. The scaremongering, the willingness to out and out lie and to make promises that were never going to be kept.
And yes, make the vow and not living up to the vow, and then moving straight on to evil on the Monday morning, 3 days after they won the referendum. My goodness, that was Cameron, let alone this lot.
Yeah.
Let me quote Peter, because I found the quote. We may not like what they are doing or the way they do it, or what it is that they're seeking to build, but we absolutely must learn from their methods, because these methods clearly work. The latest round in this fight is the internal market bill and all that it implies for the British state itself and for its periphery, its annexed territories. Boris Johnson's regime will win.
I'm not totally with Peter yet, but he is moving me to the stance of, you know, we need to look at the union as already gone. We just need to make it official, if you like. That headspace that he talks about, yeah, I'm beginning to think he's right about that. I'm not actually sure how we move that mindset to where Peter wants to be.
How do you trust this government, right? Even with May,
Well,
Cameron, but how do you trust this government? This has got much worse than Cameron and May. To even if the referendum, even if a Section 30 order was granted, if you can get that far, even if a referendum was started, that there would be fair media access, etc. Even if it was won by the Yes campaign, would they refuse to accept it?
yeah, I mean, we have to think about these things, but I think long before we get there, they're just going to build a brick wall of no, you're not getting your Section 30. I've never doubted that he was right about that. So there has to be a way to deal with that. And I think that the British government has opened that door inadvertently.
By breaking the law.
Well, essentially, if it's okay for the British government to decide there are parts of a treaty that are unacceptable, an international treaty that are unacceptable to them, why isn't it all right for a Scottish government to accept there are parts of the Treaty of Union?
Here's a good question, Norrie.
Unacceptable to them.
Here's a good question, bearing what you're saying there, is does it mean, is it worthwhile going to law? Because bear in mind that judicial review is under review and it's going to attack Scots law.
I actually do think it's worth going there.
We'll have to be quick.
But it means that for both sides, if the stance now of the Westminster government is international law does not apply to them, it doesn't matter what the outcome is. So in fact, the worry that the outcome would be, no, sorry, you can't decide your own future, Scotland. We can turn around and say, well, sorry, that particular bit of that particular law we don't feel is fair or applies to us, therefore we'll just ignore it.
It all falls down on the belief in the sovereignty of Parliament, that one Parliament, the Westminster Parliament, cannot bind a following Parliament in any way. Every Parliament is sovereign under the English system, and that has never been accepted in Scotland. And
that is an argument we can take in front of a judge. And I think we may have already won it. There's been a vote in Holyrood and in Westminster.
I actually looked into this today, and I might even have to give you the link before we post the show today. And somebody, let me just find the name of the person, because I looked at it in some depth. What was the name? Sionaidh, oh, she's got a Gaelic name. Sionaidh Douglas Scott, Messing with the Acts of Union. And she looks into that, and there was a law lord decided in 1953 that this is way before the modern era, that essentially the sovereignty of Parliament, as far as Westminster concerned, stands. It doesn't matter what the Treaty of Union said.
Yeah, but I mean, the Treaty of Union has been broken. It was broken at the outset. So, I mean, is the position that whatever Westminster does is okay, but Scotland can't break any of the rules. Holyrood can't break any of the rules. So there are ramifications for this. We're only going to break wee bits of international law. Well, the only wee bit we're going to break is the bit that says we have no rights over our own constitution in Scotland. Well, I'm saying the constitutional question. We have no right. I mean, if the fact is that we have no right over constitutional questions, then we will never get an independence referendum because this government is morally bankrupt. So there is no moral argument to win, as they'll just ignore any moral argument. Peter's last line, I think, is where he's kind of pushing me or pulling me towards his position. The Union will be the death of Scotland unless we kill it first.
I've slowly, over the last few months, come to Peter's position, and my acceptance of most of what he says is getting stronger.
Well, I can't say as I'm quite there yet, but I feel I'm moving closer to it. Gerry Hassan in the National today.
Gerry. Now, last week we talk about Gerry because I think we said last week, and it kind of sums Gerry up. He's been a lifelong socialist Labour Party member. He's in favour of a Scottish, and he was talking kindly about federalism this week, but essentially he'd be quite happy with an independent Scotland run by the Labour Party. Fair enough?
No.
Okay, you explain what his position is, you think?
I don't think he would be happy for an independent Scotland to be run by this Scottish branch of the Labour Party. He's quite prepared to be critical.
He's quite left-wing, isn't he?
He is. I mean, I think you could say he's the left's man in the indie blogger movement. Well, now journalist movement. I'm beginning to enjoy his writing again. I have to say that I've found him a bit long-winded in the past, and this is not a short article, but I don't think he wastes words in this one. I think everything he says is pertinent to the position, and it's mostly about what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I link the main issues of today, I think, which is the word rogue. Actually, Joanna Sherry had a good article the other day, which we kind of missed because I think it was late on Friday. It came out and after our recording when we don't do Saturday. The headline on Gerry's article is Scottish values are no longer compatible with the rogue nation the UK has become. Now, this isn't just an issue for Scotland. This is an issue for anybody that's not part of the far right in England as well.
Well, it's an international issue.
Of course it is.
The dismantling of, if you like, the backbone of Toryism by this government, and in 6 months, okay, the Brexiteers started it, I suppose, in 2016, but basically all the tenets of Toryism have been rattled at best, if not completely pushed over by this government.
State aid, for one.
Well, state aid, the party of law and order. Mm-hmm. Who can ever forget that favourite?
The rule of law, yes. According to Gerry, Margaret Thatcher was that you cannot have freedom without a rule of law, she said.
What they seem prepared to do is to take all rights under their blanket. I mean, they're now talking about leaving the European
Human Rights
Court of Human Rights,
which has got nothing to do with the European Union, which has everything to do with the Council of Europe, which Britain had a big hand in setting up, and even Russia is bound by the Council of Europe.
But it's got the word Europe in the title, so it must be bad.
You want to hear the summary of what the end of what he says. I mean, we don't need to stop there. It says, as the UK now embraces a future as a rogue state, I think this is going to be the key word of the day. It's going to be a rogue episode, this one. We in Scotland have a different future open to us. We are a nation which wants to be a democratic, progressive and European country. These are not revolutionary principles in the 21st century, but they are now ones increasingly obviously incompatible with the harsh dogmatic zealotry which now defines the UK. Now, I remember the word radical being part of my youth and my revolutionary youth. And you know, I was quite shocked when Margaret Thatcher came along and stole the term radical, because I hadn't thought about the right wing being radical.
I'm not even sure we can call these people just right wing. I mean, that heading, that right wing, it's more complicated than that. I mean, your use of the word disruptor.
That's partly Dominic Cummings' favourite word, or maybe
I'm not sure they have an ideology to follow.
Generally speaking, the wealthy and the rich and the elites survive any major crisis better than the rest of us.
Yeah, but this lot seem to want to burn the house down. I don't think they know what they're going to build in its place. They leave you with the impression that it's almost a game to them, where they want to keep knocking the pieces over and putting them up randomly to see what happens.
Well, look, let's rewind just a minute to the word revolutionary. Don't forget, who's running the show? Who's part of the team now? It's at number 10. People that used to run the Revolutionary Marxist Party. They're part of the think tank that now run the government.
I'm not sure they are part of it.
Oh, they are. They're spads in number 10.
Yeah, but I don't see them as the core. The core here is Gove, Cummings, and Johnson as a figurehead. The more I see of this, the more I get the impression that it's Gove and Cummings running this government, and Boris Johnson is there as a useful idiot.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. That's fair. We needn't expect any. Bear in mind, he wasn't even a serious Brexiteer. He wrote 2 articles. One for whether he couldn't make up his mind which way to go.
But I think the way this plays out is Cummings uses his advisors to give him tactical ways to achieve his destruction. And that's why the Marxists are there.
Creative destruction, says Gerry Hassan.
I think creative's gone too far. I think it's just destructive. I don't think they have a plan for what happens after they've burnt the building down.
And having taken on the BBC, the Civil Service, Parliament and the Supreme Court, the government has now graduated to international law. This is about something more than revolutionary conservatism, which pays too much of a compliment to a set of ideas filled with prejudice, bile, bigotry, and a profound responsibility for the consequences of its actions. So they don't. You're right. They don't care what happens, do they?
No, I'm almost convinced that this is just about destruction, and it's got nothing to do with making Britain better. They just want to make Britain different, and they're not sure what that different looks like.
They'll do well.
I have no confidence in their ability to plan a barbecue, let alone a future for the country.
Never mind a piss up at a brewery.
Well, let's move on to Alex Massie. Now, the reason we kind of have chosen to discuss this is after 2 pretty serious pieces on the future, Alex Massie has decided to go with the Salmond inquiry at Holyrood. How did you describe this, Stuart?
Froth. It's frothy, man. Remember that one?
It's interesting now that he attacks Leslie Evans for claiming she couldn't remember half the answers to half the questions she was asked on her second appearance in front of the committee. And he basically has said she should go, which is kind of weird, finding myself on the same side as Alex Massie. She should have gone when the government lost £500,000 to Alex Salmond's team for cocking up the inquiry. But the gist of this is there's definitely something bad going on because an incompetent civil servant can't answer questions.
He kind of, right in the middle, he really picks on Peter Morrell, who's the CEO of the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon's partner, husband. And on the one hand, the question was, who knows what and when, as usual, all the way back to the Nixon scandal, if you like. Who knew what and when? And apparently there was at least one, if not two meetings in the Morrell house months before the date of which both Peter Morrell himself as CEO of the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon as the First Minister in charge of the government admit to knowing about the accusations against Alex Salmond. And on one hand, so I'm not going to go into the detail, but I mean, can you imagine a powerful married couple like these two not sharing the most important things in their lives?
Okay, can I go back to what you said? The meeting at the Sturgeon's house, according to Sturgeon, was about party matters. Okay?
So why wouldn't you talk to the chief executive of the party?
Well, Stuart, just let me say my piece, please. The dodgy bit in this is that according to Morrell, that wasn't discussed. And as you say, he is an official of the party. Why wouldn't she discuss that? I didn't see this, so I would like to know the context. I would like to know whether the question was, did you discuss Alex Salmond's position in regard to the inquiry in the civil service, in which case
it's a written,
it could well be, no, we didn't.
We didn't. It wasn't an answer to a question. It was in a written submission. He hasn't been in front of the committee yet, in person.
Well, what was the question that was asked of him?
Who knew what and when?
All right, that's good. About what?
Well, that's me. I'm not.
I knew Alex Salmond bought a hamburger on Thursday the 18th.
We don't know what's happened, and I mean.
And that, Stuart, is my point.
Well,
you, like everybody else, the reason this piece was written was everybody would buy into a theory that's neither been proved or disproved yet.
It won't. Let's be honest. Right now, with a worldwide pandemic, 194 countries struggling with a worldwide pandemic, and goodness knows it seems to be ticking off again right now, and a criminal government driving this country to the dogs. What matters? Does it really matter who knew what and when? And
Stuart, this will be on every unionist paper front page if it turns out that Nicola Sturgeon lied to Parliament. It will be headline news on the BBC. Don't doubt for a minute, if there's anything they can paint her black with, it will be headline news.
So what we should be doing is the same as Brewer's editorial team and the BBC most of the time. When we don't like a topic, we don't talk about it.
Well, who's suggesting we don't talk about it? All I'm saying to you is, and I'm sorry, Stuart, you do this quite regularly. You have bought Massie's line, hook, line, and sinker. You have decided that it's obvious they would have talked about it. It's not obvious they would have talked about it. There will be things that Nicola Sturgeon knows, stuff from the Privy Council, for instance, that she cannot discuss with her husband because she'd be breaking the law if she did. So Maybe she has that discipline. A discipline maybe you and I lack, but we're not in government. There will be knowledge she has she cannot impart to her husband.
I'm a serial failure at relationships like marriage, so my opinion on this doesn't count very much.
Well, my point to this is I do not find it impossible that she didn't discuss this with her husband. If she recused herself, if Leslie Evans went to her and said, look, we're going to have to put Alex Salmond through this investigation, and she went, right, stop there. I'm too close to this. I want to hear no more about it. The decisions on where you go with this have to be yours, because obviously I'm tainted by association with Alex Salmond.
No, absolutely. We don't know yet. And as I say, it's really not that important in the swing of things. Yes, it'll be a big splash in Scotland, but will it change?
Will be huge. It'll be huge whether she gets reprimanded or not.
Well, the general drift about Scottish independence is that it's not Nicola Sturgeon's referendum. It's not Nicola Sturgeon's campaign. It's apparently a mass movement of the people of Scotland. So who cares who leads it?
Well, maybe you don't, but the Unionist press will splash this. It'll be 6 o'clock news, 6:30 news.
How can I disagree? Whether Alex Salmond was guilty or not, or whether he was a bit dodgy or not, they've nobbled him.
Yeah, and that is exactly the playbook they will use with this.
Absolutely. What about some good news to finish, Norrie? Because I think you've got another clip for us.
I have. I've got
Ewan McGregor.
Ewan McGregor.
Star Wars.
Star Wars.
Train spotting, mate. About Star Wars.
Train spotting. Apparently, Ewan McGregor has come out for independence.
Which is good.
Not quite the way I read it, I have to be honest. But here's the clip for you to judge for yourself.
Looking forward to this.
I'm having to do a lot of clicking here.
But the Scottish have voted against their own independence in the past. Where are you on that?
Well, I was always for keeping the union. I think it worked. It works. And then after the Brexit vote, I think for sure I've changed my tune about it. I think Scotland have been voting for a government that they haven't been given for years. We're very left voting country, Scotland, and we've been under conservative rule, all through my childhood, and so I think probably enough's enough. And I think after the Brexit vote, when I was shooting in Scotland, we were shooting the follow-on film to Train Spotting the night of the Brexit vote, and I couldn't. The next day they showed the sort of people that voted to stay in Europe were on the map in yellow, and the people that voted to leave were in blue. And the map was split in half. Scotland was yellow and England was blue, apart from a little bit around London. And I just thought, that's it. We're not. The Scottish people want to stay in Europe, in the European Union, and the English don't. So I just think we're going in different directions. So I think probably it's time. I just think probably it's time. I think once Boris became Prime Minister, Scotland was like, right, that's it. We're here.
Oh, that's the short version. There's another version as well, but that's very good. Nice way to finish, Norrie, today. Congratulations.
Yeah, it wasn't bad. Okay, thank you, Stuart. Hopefully we'll have Jimmy with us at some point next week.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Norrie.
I'm Norrie Stuart. Thanks for listening, folks. And we will catch you tomorrow, Monday, when no doubt everything will have been put to right and Boris will have become king of the world, not just Britain. Cheers for now, folks.
Cheerio.